Welcome everybody to Tech Pulse with Integris. This is our virtual Inspire event series that we are doing over the last month or so. You can check it out at integrisit.com. We are here today to talk about Copilot. So we're going to kick it off here in a few minutes, give everybody a chance to join. We're going to talk about Microsoft Copilot for 365. And we've got a VVOC session that we are kicking off for this. This is a online app that you can answer polls for us. It gives you links to a bunch of resources. You can ask questions and we can respond to those. You can also drop questions here in the chat or as comments on StreamYard. So feel free to interact and let us know your thoughts. And also there's lots of helpful resources. So go to this, use the QR code to log in.
Yep, and we'll give you guys a little bit of time to go ahead and use the register, get on the VBox app while we're waiting. So while we're waiting for everybody to hop on VBox, I'll do the introductions. The lady speaking first is Adele Strauss. She's our VP of Product and Portfolio. And me, I'm Brian Wheeler. I am a Strategic Operations Manager here at Integris. Really looking forward to talking about implementing Copilot in Microsoft 365 and then figuring out how we best secure and keep data compliant as we have. So we'll give you guys a little more time on VBox and then we'll get started. I am excited, Adele. I got a lot of slides.
You do have a lot of slides. A lot of great information today.
Yeah, just let me know if I go too nerdy because there's a lot.
There's a lot. Yeah. But it's all super helpful. I think Microsoft did not adequately prepare us when they dropped this earlier this year. And so we were figuring it out, right?
Yeah. There's the emotional prepared and then the physical prepared. And both of those were not covered yet at all. So I think we got a few people in the VBox. Awesome.
And I think we can get started.
Awesome. So I'll kick us off real quick and kind of walk through a little bit of the agenda items, and we'll be walking through different talking points here that we have. The first is we really want to focus on what we have. So you can look and see we're first up on the list is talking about Copilot for 365. Then we'll get into compliance. We'll talk a little bit about the legal landscape, and then after that, you can see the rest of those lessons learned and obviously some checklist items. So without further ado,
we'll get into it. So Copilot, today we are talking about specifically Copilot for Microsoft 365. This is what's embedded with the apps that you use every day across M365. This does not have to do with Copilot Studio or Azure or any of those other things that you may have heard thrown around. Today we are focused solely on Copilot for 365. That's something that you can have access to just on Teams, or you can have it across the whole suite. So keep that in mind as we go through this. It's still developing, but there are lots of cool things that we've shown previously. You can check that out on our previous webinar on integrisit.com to see to see some of the things that it can do across these apps.
And I really like the previous webinar we did, where we walked through some of the talking points and some of the summation or summarization items that they have. Copilot in Outlook and Copilot in Teams is awesome. I agree with everybody else. Copilot for PowerPoint has a little bit ways to go, but still solid effort. I'm really looking forward to seeing what they do with this tool in the future. Really cool.
Yeah, it has made a huge difference. Big time saver for me, being on PTO, catching up after doing a webinar on what's happened on Teams, all of those great things.
Yeah, I will tell you, when you miss a chat stream and you're able to tell Copilot, just tell me what it is. I don't want the nerd fight. Just skip and just give me the bullets, and it's great.
It is.
Talking about Copilot though, I really like this slide. And before I let you talk, I'll actually talk about how cool that spot is on the right side. That 96%, so almost 9 out of 10 would be basically upset or disappointed they no longer had access to Copilot.
Yeah.
And then that bottom stat, almost half say that having access to Copilot would influence their choice for employers. I don't know. I always like highlighting those two. What are the ones you like to kind of walk through on this one?
Well, I think just overall, just how high the numbers are across the board on this, of feeling like they're more productive, they're able to focus more, they can stay in the flow, that they can spend less time processing all of this information that we're bombarded with every day,
Mm-hmm.
is astounding. So, 1 in 3 say that it saved them more than 30 minutes per day. If that's
Yeah,
real dollars, if you multiply that across your workforce, that's insane.
yeah. I like the stat just above that one too, where it says that almost 9 out of 10 or over 9 out of 10 makes it easier to get started on the first draft.
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but getting out of bed sometimes is harder than working through the day. So it's getting from 0 to 1. And that happens also in drafting an email or Word doc. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I always like this. I like this slide.
Yeah. And it also shows that, while some of the narrative around AI is that it could be taking jobs, it is also very much seen as an advantage for businesses to provide to their employees. Those employees who are going to take advantage of it and use it want to, because they understand it's going to mean they're more productive.
Absolutely.
So we've talked about this before, and this is if you've been on one of our other sessions, this is a reminder, but also to keep this in mind as we go through the rest of this conversation, how Copilot, specifically in 365, can impact the workflow of your employees, whether it's making your meetings more effective so that you can quickly catch up on what they talked about, looking at processing those transcripts and recordings, summarizing and having next steps, not having to take minutes and notes during meetings. That literally eliminates a role a lot of times, so everyone can fully participate in the conversation. Analyzing data, using Copilot in your Excel to be able to analyze the data and pull out nice charts and get better information. We are bombarded by data these days, so anything to help us get over that hump of what do I do with all of this, is a great place to start with Copilot for Excel. You want to hit on PowerPoint and email, Brian?
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, why don't we do this? Why don't we open up the first VBox, and I'll kind of talk through some of the content creation pieces and even the email aspect. So,
Yeah.
folks, if you're in VBox, go ahead and jump in there, and there's a first prompt for you. What are some of your goals? And then while you're filling out those goals, I'll start talking about the content creation. What's really cool for me is I am kind of one of those nerd guys that really doesn't enjoy creating PowerPoints or creating presentations. From zero. And what Copilot has offered or allowed me to do is kind of jumpstart that creativity. It
Yep.
allows me to kind of quickly catch on some of the key points that I have, and then allow me to expand on what I wanted to say or what I was trying to say. The email processing is pretty awesome because a lot of times what happens in my world is I get a forward email from an email string and it says "see below."
Yep.
And if someone would just said "see below," ... and I would just scroll and it hurts. With Copilot, I can just say, I need a summary, I need bullet points, give me the top 10, whatever it is. I also like Copilot for the opposite reason, because when I need to send out outbound messages, and I don't necessarily know how I want to start that outbound message, but I know what I want to say, Copilot will give me a brief draft of what I think I could start with. I'm like, oh yeah, I actually like that first couple sentences. I don't like the whole thing. Like I'll delete it, I'll personalize it, I'll do whatever I want. But what's really nice is when I use the Outlook Copilot, it actually provides a brief draft of what I want to do. That and the summarization. If you really think about summarizing your inbox after you've been gone for an hour or a day, I was in Toledo for 4 days, and I came back to 180, 190 actual messages that were important. And I just said, give me the top 5 things I need to look at. And it was able to do that for me, which is really cool.
Did you say you were in Toledo?
Toledo, Ohio.
Toledo, Ohio. What were you doing in Toledo, Ohio?
Well, this is going to take a turn for the sad because we were there for a funeral.
Oh, okay. I'm
And a
sorry.
family reunion. No, it's quite all right. But it was really nice seeing everybody. But yeah, Toledo, Ohio. So
Very nice.
yeah, so some really
Um,
cool words out here.
there are. So we got some good things here: work order planning, email organization, Excel shortcuts, be more efficient, consolidate VBA,
Yeah,
uh, any of those Excel things, summarize emails. All great stuff that Copilot can do, and AI
absolutely.
can do for you guys. And we're going to touch on some of that today. Now,
Oh, yeah.
so for the next one, what department are you in? We'd like to know so that we can be able to gear our conversation better um, towards use cases for you all with our case studies.
And I'll tell you, with us having as many data points or data analysis topics kind of came into that first part,
Yeah,
um, having Copilot uncover, insights, key insights of those aspects, but doing it effectively and securely is probably on most people's minds as far as that's concerned. And likely also creating like powerful presentations off of that data, knowing that the data is secured, knowing the presentation is secured, like that whole way through. So
yeah.
you get different
Comparing
levels.
information, all of that stuff is so important.
Yeah.
Let's see who we've got in the audience today. Some marketing,
Yeah.
IT, finance, and some other. No HR or sales today. That's interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
So we will make sure to cover some of that. Now we're going to get into some of the compliance with AI. So, again, if you didn't see our first presentation on what Microsoft 365 Copilot can do, go back and check that out. Today, we're going to focus a lot more on the risks and what you need to be looking out for and some of the use cases. So, Brian's going to get into this with the compliance. So Microsoft talks about their principles that they use for AI to assure us that our information is secure and protected, and that they are also building Copilot to respect certain principles like fairness and reliability, the safety, having privacy and security around your information, and then making sure that the responses are inclusive and transparent, that it's not going to do the hallucinations that you sometimes hear about with other AI tools. And they're trying to put as many safeguards in place to make sure that it is going to be respectful of your organization. Um, and most importantly, your data is your data. It is stored within your 365, and it's not used to train the OpenAI Foundation. It's all protected by the security controls that your M365 environment already has access to. And as long as those are set up, and we're going to talk about what that looks like, then you can rest assured that your data is protected.
I think one thing to remind everybody is that this is another way to think about this is like your house. So
Mm,
Microsoft has built the neighborhood that we
yep.
all live in, but it's your responsibility to make sure your doors are locked, your windows are locked, the inside doors are locked. If you have a safe, that's kept away,
Yeah.
and it's separate controls. The different things. If you have snacks that you want to hide from the kids, you put them up high. Like all those aspects, it is your house. So in and of itself, it is your data.
Yeah.
So we can kind of walk through those, what we can do, what we should look at, and also look at some governance items as well.
Yeah, that's a great analogy because you can have the best alarm system in the world, but if you don't enable it, then
Yeah.
and Microsoft gives you the ability to do as much as you'd like to secure your information, but
Hmm.
it has to be enabled and put in place. Otherwise, it doesn't do anything for you.
Yep.
So, what are your biggest concerns relating to Copilot and AI tools? Uh, what's the there's a lot of marketing around AI there, but there's also a lot of scary things, and some of those are warranted, some of those aren't. So, we'd love to hear what you guys think about what are you worried about? So we can also speak to those today.
What's kind of cool about Microsoft allowing us to own our data is we're able to shape our experience when it comes to Copilot in a broad sense. And I like your analogy of the alarm code. It's great that you have an alarm system. It's really bad that you use the code 1234. That I also need to change my luggage password there, but
Yeah.
that's a separate thing in and of itself. Is making sure that you're doing things, not just going through the steps, but actually implementing the right controls and doing the due diligence and the hard work it takes to be secure.
Right.
So as we wrap the thing here, biggest security concern, I'm waiting for Copilot to prompt me about Sarah Connor. She comes up in every conversation you're with me on AI. Just so you're aware. If you were here for the last one, you're here for this one as well.
There we go. So we got some we need to change the color on this one. Ethical concerns, security, reliable information. Yeah, the reliability of it. Is it confidential? Donor data, protecting your donors or your clients, and then the risk management. Those are all definitely big concerns. And we will be able to talk about some of those with how you handle your data and we're going to talk about a couple of specific compliance pieces here, but this is true for any compliance framework that you guys may need to uphold.
Yeah, so I think it's important to at least identify the two big governance items that this will fall under as far as AI or Copilot or automation in general. One of those being HIPAA. And just to give you a high level, if we actually wanted to do an entire topic on HIPAA, it's at least an hour long to talk about the entire law. But you can see that it's a U.S. law that protects personal health information and also electronic personal health information. There are some restrictions as far as, and you can see below what those are as far as just access control, encryption levels, and those aspects. When you go over to the GDPR, that more relates to the EU. But as you start to dive in, again, at least an hour long conversation on GDPR and how that relates to your business. The reality, though, is that if you ensure the data subject rights, so where that data lives and where it's allowed to move, and those cross-border data transfer restrictions that are in place, and then also along with that, having the availability to do breach notifications as well on GDPR. Microsoft has some of this pre-built into some of their AI solutions now, so you can see the Copilot for 365, and then also into Microsoft Entra ID. Entra ID pulls all of that from the compliance center that you can see up there above. So I kind of went counterclockwise there on the slide, if you will. But what's cool about that is in the compliance center, you have privacy policies, you can do security safeguards, you can do a risk assessment, and then also within that same compliance center is your BAA, which for most people, if you have a HIPAA governance that you fall under, you are required for all vendors to have that BAA, that business agreement that you have between all of your vendors. And that's where that's found, is inside that compliance center. There's a couple other pieces, though, we have to turn on in compliance, and I couldn't fit it on this one, so I think I put it on the next one. There it is. So, as you can tell, there are at least 17 different pieces that we have to walk through and navigate and to do. Multi-factor authentication is important, device-based controls as far as access and security, getting into some sensitivity labels, and then also user session risks are important. But the whole aspect here is understanding that when it comes to HIPAA or GDPR or any other type of governances you fall under, if it's PCI, DSS, those aspects, is you have to discover and evaluate the risks of the applications that you have. Now, I will tell you that this is an old slide. There's about 400 plus AI apps called out on this slide. This slide's about 2 months old. You're going to have to put a zero behind that and maybe another zero with commas, obviously. The explosion in the AI app market is incredible. We're really starting to see those cool niche development come in to where people are actually starting to build and design and develop AI apps. And we need to understand on IT or in security or in finance what that looks like as far as what are the risks, what are the controls I can put in place for my data, for my stuff. And I think the next one.
Yeah, these are all good questions to ask. No matter, we're talking about 365 today, but any solution that says they're starting to use AI, for you to ask that question of them. What are you doing with my data? Who else gets access to it? And make sure that you understand the risks that come with that if you're going to participate in it.
So with that comes this
This
Microsoft.
looks like a lot, Ryan.
It's a little bit. All right. So let me nerd out for just a second. So Microsoft Purview information protection. So Microsoft Purview, just in general, gives us and it provides us a not only just a portal to publish the policies and those safeguard baselines that we want, but
Mm,
it also gives us the visibility into Exchange, into Teams, into SharePoint, and then that logo below on the bottom left, that's Power BI. If you're not aware of that.
okay.
All of those, though, then get wrapped into those data classification services that we have. And another way to describe this is sensitivity labels. Like,
Hmm.
I'm going to create a policy that allows my corporate data to be shared inside my corporation. I'm going to provide a finance label that only my finance people can see, and then
Hmm.
I'm going to give and apply different labels as it needs to be. So it's secret or it's private or whatever that is. For instance, I want the owner's files, where their payroll, their bonus structure, all those pieces, to have a different label than the same stuff that I put in our social media posts. I don't ever want to have that data leakage come out. Well, Purview is the spot that we give that. And you can see
Okay.
that there on the main screen is the green, yellow, and red.
Hmm.
Those are just the basic guidances that they offer. What's cool, though, is when you leverage Microsoft Purview, you can actually publish that across to other services. So if you use Box or Google Workspace,
Oh,
Salesforce,
really?
yeah, and then also with that, you can also cross-publish into your Azure instance if you're doing it, or if it's
Okay.
on-prem SharePoint and those pieces. I
Yep.
will tell you that as you start to develop these things, you start to identify that, like, hey, I can create all the labels that I want, but it goes back into what is my personal policies that I wrote for my business that I
Right.
want our people to follow, and the
Yeah.
systems that we have, because that advanced compliance solution that we're building here needs to have some sort of framework that we build off of, some sort of baseline that, hey, this is what we do when we treat data. We have to write that down on paper so it's received
Hmm.
across our global estate, or our digital estate, if you will. And I think that's actually our next talking point, or as we walk into this, is to walk in the legal landscape. What does that mean, and how does it work?
Yeah. Because that you're really talking about a whole new level of classification, um, and a new system that you have to build out with doing that.
Yeah,
There needs to be a strategy there. And unfortunately, across the legal landscape, there is not a ton of guidance at this time.
yeah.
We had a lawyer on our panel at our last in-person Inspire event in Baltimore, and she did a great job of addressing this. And one of the things she mentioned is that the states are starting to address this. So there are some key states like California and Colorado that are starting to put in some policies or using existing policies to try to govern AI. But of course, our the legal landscape federally is there's no specific guidelines. So it's complex, it's evolving, and we are trying to make it to fit into our existing legal frameworks, and that's going to be very interesting to watch develop
It,
over
it,
the next.
it kind of sounds like in a lot of ways this is the Wild West,
Yeah.
and there's rules or guidances, but there's no real, like, the government's not going to come in and save us, which is
No.
a whole other piece in and of itself. But so it looks like
Yeah.
it's on us to decide what we do, how we use it, in that aspect.
Yep. Yeah. And so one of the ways you can start that is the Integris Acceptable AI Use Policy. This is a link that you'll find on VBox. You can find an example template. And really, this is just laying the groundwork for your employees about what they should be educated on, what they can and cannot do with AI, and a big piece of this is educating them. They're your weakest link as to what they put out and how they use the solutions that are available today. I can guarantee you, you have at least one employee that is using it in some way, shape, or form, even if you have not addressed it in your business. So, making sure that they understand what the risks are, and then putting a policy in place so you can enforce that and protect yourself.
And before we get to the next slide, you can go ahead and pull it up. Amanda from the audience asked, so once we create those labels and have the docs or data sorted. You're saying the labels can be applied to Azure profiles. Short answer, yes. Long answer is it will take a little bit more effort than just the Azure profiles. It'll be either by the SharePoint root folder, it'll be by the team, it'll be by role-based access control. But it's however we set the policy, you can create that person to do that work or encompass that work that they're doing for that data sensitivity label. Typically, it's not just to the Azure profile, so to the individual, because at times I do corporate data and at times I do private data.
Yep.
I don't want all of my data to be private, but I also don't want my private data to be corporate. So I need to be able to have the ownership of myself to be able to apply the additional, while also having safeguards that if I put my data into this folder over here, that it's automatically figure that out. That it labels itself and that it requires. So that way that just by the residency of that data is in there. I hope I didn't get too nerdy on that, but
No,
really
I think
cool.
that's a great point because it's not just by role. Like I could be working on something that should be confidential financial data with an employee salary, but I'm not on the finance team. I'm not part of payroll, um, and that should be confidential. Versus a lot of the other stuff I work on, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Um, so there's definitely a level of complexity there that you'll have to work through in order to make sure you're protecting your information the way you want to.
So what we did here is we actually grabbed the top 10 or top 8 or top 6. I can't remember how many we put in this thing, but it's the top concerns, the key concerns that we kind of work through. And you can see that how will sensitive business data be protected? Will Copilot integrate smoothly with current IT infrastructure? Will Copilot meet industry specified compliance governments? And then obviously that last one is will employees adapt to using Copilot effectively?
Yeah.
The one I focus on is that sensitive business data will be protected. It goes back to the policies that we walk through with Purview. And it also requires a little bit of education to the staff that says, hey, when you're handling sensitive data, you probably need to just check to make sure this flag is. And that'll probably only be a 1 month to 2 month experience for everybody to check and verify and validate. Because
Mhm.
once you're past that publication of the policy, we can trust the policy.
Mm.
It also goes back to the flow of business, making sure that people are following the system as it's designed or as it's been built, if you will, to
Yeah.
meet. And so it encompasses that policy with the protection that it has. And if you think about as you start to test and moving into that next piece, the current IT infrastructure, testing compatibility, making sure this is a phased rollout, not just cross-publishing out all of your sensitivity labels at one time. Please do not do that. It is really not fun to try to walk those back afterwards. If you mark everything secret, you cannot share anything in your SharePoint domain. So take a moment and plan, test, and do a phased rollout. Otherwise, you're going to be sitting there learning PowerShell on a Friday afternoon, going, "Oh, we really need to do something here." Uh, just speaking from not personal experience, but I had to help too many times on these things, and it's a so it's a tough one. But yeah, and as far as compliance concerns on the third one, what's cool with Purview and Compliance Center, we can auto publish those down. It makes it really easy for us.
Yeah.
Next concerns is how will existing data be migrated? What's awesome is there's no migration. If it's already in SharePoint, if it's already in Teams, if it's already in your OneDrive, all of that
It's
data lives. It's exactly where it stays. You don't have to move it. Now, if your data is not there, you'll need to move it into there.
Yep.
Or you need to allow the Copilot to experience that data wherever it lives. So you'll have to connect. And that's not going to be part of the Copilot for 365. That'll be for Copilot Studio or other
Yep.
ones. This one, actually, you can see that last question, can Copilot be tailored to meet any kind of specific business needs? Really, you need to look at Copilot Studio for like specific business needs. And that's a completely separate license, different stand up. It's more of a bespoke model development time that you have. And I'll tell you though, what's great about this is Copilot performs, regardless of downtime. That looking at the second slide, it's a first action assistant. I always love that as a statement. It's a first action assistant. I can prompt it with something I want it to do. It comes
Uh-huh.
back with that 0 to 0.5 or 0 to 0.75. Doesn't get me to 1, but it can get me closer to where I want it to be. versus me sitting there trying to scrounge my brain, if you will, to understand how am I going to write this email, how am I going to draft this data, what are the key insights, what I'm looking. I just push the button, it does it, and it prompts me into, oh, that's a good thing to think of. I could highlight in this way, I could talk about it this way, I can narrate in this manner, which is really cool.
Yeah, it does take training though, right? There's a certain level of needing to. Uh, I would say it's not going to cause downtime, if you're using it correctly, but it could cause some frustration initially, and that's part of what we have some resources to help you
Yeah.
understand how to use it more effectively.
I'm pretty sure if you talk to most people in my life, you could say that I need some training in this thing. So that's kind of how it goes, though. So, and then obviously the cost. Microsoft right now is doing the annual licensing for the
Yes.
365. So just pretty
So
straightforward.
yeah, it's a commitment,
Yep.
and it's an annual license, and there is no. It's not. It's you have to pay up front. There's no monthly, so you need to be aware of that, and that's. I'm sure that's intentional on Microsoft's part because they want to give you long enough to use it to figure out adoption. But
Yeah.
we do recommend that you try it with early adopters across different departments so that you can not pay for the cost and commit to it and not have people actually adopt it the way it should be used.
Yeah.
So with that, we're going to get into some lessons learned from rolling it out and adopting it across different companies. Brian's got some good use cases, and we are building on these every day as we are helping our clients adopt Copilot and make sure it's secure. So we are also learning lessons, and we're going to keep sharing those with you guys over the next 6 months to a year because it is new. And that means there's a lot of kinks to work out, but also a lot of potential. So,
Yeah. So to dive into these case studies, I need to kind of set the table here really quickly. The names in the businesses named in these case studies have been changed to protect the innocent or the not so innocent. You'll see why here in a bit. But what's really cool is the story that it tells, and the aspect of how people leveraged AI in their different businesses for the good and for the not so good. I won't say bad, but for the not so good, what that relates to. The first one is this accounting firm. And I think what I always like to target is the challenge. Like, what were they trying to do? They were trying to improve their efficiency. They were trying to improve their accuracy, and they were really trying to just ensure a strict guidance to their regulations while keeping their clients confidential, like the client data confidential. And I'll tell you that as they started to develop and deploy their pieces and the structures that they had, it was quite remarkable. So they implemented data controls for document permissions in SharePoints, and then they managed access on the SharePoint documents efficiently through Purview. They set up Azure AD directory for the identity access piece, and then made sure that only authorized personnel had access to the folders that they needed instead of going cross and saying, if you work for the company, you work for all the company. They hyper focused down on what they had. And then they implemented the DLP policies that safeguarded against the data breaches and those aspects. And you can see some of the stats that came out of this. The turnaround on tax prep tasks that they did, and then also the employee satisfaction. What's cool is that 8 out of 10 people basically said, I am more efficient and more productive now that I have a Copilot agent sitting next to me, helping me out, draft my emails, draft my documents, review those pieces that I have. I'll tell you that their holistic approach to security, though, is one of those things that it was almost like a compliance first mindset.
Yeah.
They walked into this. They integrated Copilot with a comprehensive security framework, and then they basically by using that as their start, the output became productivity, not the goal. It was the output of all of those key results, which is really cool.
Yeah. Well, they started with the structure first, right? Instead of trying to start with the tool. If you build the structure first, then the tool can work the way it's meant to. Yeah, it's really cool. When you think about, accounting in particular, numbers, like there's absolutely no reason why you can't use AI to process numbers and data like that in order to get to your results fast.
And you think about an accounting firm, the sensitive financial data that you get from your clients, not just for business, but personal financial data as well. And they had over 200 clients that they had across various industries. So for them doing what they did, how they did, they quickly realized like, oh, this could go bad very quickly.
Yeah.
And to talk about the bad, I think we have the next one is one of the bad ones.
The not so good.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, the not so good. Uh,
So what
all right.
went wrong
So,
here?
yeah, so they're a mid-sized international shipping company. They had 100 employees across 30 countries. In their rush to modernize, it's the best way to describe it, they deployed Copilot without considering the data protection, like the international data protection controls required, or implementing some basic security measures. They overlooked GDPR. They failed to set up proper data residency controls, and then they also neglected multi-factor authentication. And I'll tell you that because of that, like you can see the challenge, they sought an AI powered solution to streamline the operation and improve the service quality. But because that was their focus, because they focused on the we want efficient, we want fast, we want to modernize as quickly as possible without taking on the consideration of the security, it was pretty severe. So the EU citizens' data was inadvertently transferred to non GDPR compliant regions, which violated privacy laws.
Yep.
There was a weak security, which led to a major data breach that compromised the shipping information of some of their key clients.
Mm.
And then as a result, they lost about 40% of their European clients and suffered,
Wow.
obviously, reputational. If you think about this in the broadest sense, if you are showing yourself to no longer follow the governance or the compliance required for everybody else's rules,
Yeah.
if they are still held to that same accountability, they know that defensibility for them, they can't select you anymore because
Right.
I heard that you don't follow the rules. I can't play with you anymore, even though I
Right.
really want to. I just
Right.
can't because of the shame of what you brought yourself. So,
Yeah.
um, another a good way to think about this is instead of focusing on the bad, is to think about the takeaways, like the positive takeaways.
Hmm.
Always considering the international data laws that are required, establishing proper data residency, looking at strong authentication methods, just in general, but also especially when it comes to AI. You really want to look at that, and just conduct regular compliance reviews, just to sit down and talk with fractional CIOs or whatever it may be of just industry experts of, hey, here's what we're doing. Is this right? Is this okay? Not just the monthly or the annual that you do for HIPAA or GDPR, but sitting down and saying, hey, I am following this march. Is this correct? Bring in the industry expert into the room and saying, just check me out, make sure I'm good. Go to the doctor when you're not sick, like
Yeah.
that way you
Yeah.
don't have to be there when you are.
Yeah. And be okay with like asking the questions and going out and you know figuring out and doing the research first before you go make a rush decision like something like this. Like for example, calling out they didn't consult with legal team. That's something that like going forward you need to think about that. You can't just go implement your technology without considering possible legal implications too.
And I will tell you, there was a financial fine also tied to that
I'm
logistics
sure.
tool. But I had to
Yeah.
leave it off because as soon as you Google that number, financial translate, it got too close to an easy Google search, so I had to leave it off this case study. So but it was significant. So
Yeah. Yeah.
there was a comma. I'll just say it that way. It was a big comma. So it hurt. Um, Greenleaf. Yeah. So this one's really cool. So uh, just like our previous one where we talked about the good, you'll kind of start to see a trend here where first they figure out and they work on the compliance aspect and the data, and then they get the output of what's really cool. So
Yeah.
they needed a way to streamline operations for creative output and while keeping confidential information. And they sought a solution to boost that productivity. What's interesting about what they did and how they did is the enhancements. Um, they tailored this operation to be not a one size fits all, but more of a client's needs and a client generated aspect or a project generated aspect. And then
Hmm.
since they knew that it was client based, they then knew that data was always going to live with the client. So they started building off of the client tenant, if you will. So teams creation, teams data,
Okay.
SharePoint, all those things were tied back to the client. And then because of that, creative staff, and all those other people were then tied into those teams. Now, when you start doing data policies and you have built this correctly, it's much easier for you to have these productivity enhancements or the security posture enhancements that come in just by building it correctly, if you will, making
Yeah.
data-driven decisions early on versus, oh, hey, how do we do this? I don't know. It's Tuesday. Let's just sprint to the end. It's one of those things. It is scalable too.
Hmm.
What they did and how they built their system was it was remarkable to hear the scalability that they use, and because of that, they saw more campaigns being able to be managed concurrently versus before. They saw an increase in billable hours. Just the remarkable nature of we didn't add staff and we saw 20% more billable hours.
That's
There's,
crazy.
that's huge.
Yeah.
And there's a bunch more to it. They actually got some awards. They got some really cool industry things. Again, I had to leave it off because it's just a Google search away from figuring out who and what these people are. But again, they first focused on tailoring the experience to the data and figuring out how do we best build this. Now, for Greenleaf in particular, they were on prem and they were with Adobe, and they decided that, hey, we want to use Copilot, but we want to use it effectively. So how do we
Mhm.
build this to bring our data into it? So it wasn't always
Okay.
historical. They actually brought data in, and that's how they built their new business process, business flow to leverage those AI tools.
Wow. So they didn't just take advantage of their existing. They
Mhm.
literally changed their workflow entirely.
Oh yeah, this was a shift, and for an employee size of over 50 people or around 50 people, it was not just an easy move, if you will. This was an alignment conversation. So what's cool is that they were teams based and client based. So as clients got moved into the Copilot experience, you could just start shifting one client, next client. It was a phased approach. It wasn't just we're going to light the rocket and get there as soon as possible. It's we're going to move this in, and the method of madness worked out pretty well.
Yeah. Obviously, 20% increase in billable hours. That is real money. Like, but I'm sure if you weighed that against the amount of time they took to build it, that there's going to be some time for that to play out. But that's going forward, like forever.
What's
So,
really cool is the client trust and the data security aspects that you have.
mhm.
Um, I don't know if you ever dealt with creative vendors and those kind of pieces, but if
Never.
you do, there's an occasional thing that happens where you get cross client information, or you
Yes.
might see cross client
Yep.
stats.
Yep.
And then you have to question, like, okay, cool, that's really good that this plumbing company is, but what about my professional service company?
Right.
Like, I actually want to know what works there, and they can just say oopsie, and with this group with Greenleaf, they were able to just restrict all of that out just by programmatically assigning their tools, their data, and the teams all the way across to that focus on their data loss policies. You couldn't accidentally send company A's data to company B. It
Mm.
wouldn't allow you. Like the policy stopped it, so there was zero breaches, zero data security challenges. That actually kind of saved their butt a couple times, like probably if you will. But it's creative, so we always going to give them a little
Mhm.
grace. But at the same time, it just feels better.
Yes. Yeah. I think the key here between this one and the accounting one is it's built around the clients. That's where you start structuring it. If you start from your employees or those kinds of the other ways of building it, then you don't create an experience that's good for your clients, and that's ultimately what matters.
Yeah.
Okay, so
So,
we've got three left, but we probably don't have time for all three. So which one would you like to go to?
uh, so we can go to the health first client clinic. That's the next one. That's the second to last. Um, and I'll just do the last two. We'll skip the TechSmart one. Um, Health First is really cool. They were looking for a solution to reduce some of their admin burden and while enhancing some of their record keeping pieces that they wanted to do. And another side of this is they also overall they wanted to enhance their information for their healthcare providers, like the information accessibility, if you will,
Hmm.
all while following under the high standards of patient data, privacy, and patient data privacy and security. So that's always there. What's cool is that they looked at this and they first conducted a compliance audit. So first and foremost, they started with how compliant are we, and where do we need to go from here. Then they did after they did the audit, they then did a risk assessment of when we look at this, what are the risks that we have? So since we are compliant now, where can we go? And then they developed a phased implementation of moving those controls, those security efforts, and those efficiencies over. They implemented some RBAC, so role-based access control,
Okay.
and then obviously some heavy data labeling and classification that they did. Um, What's interesting for this clinic in particular, they automated some of their data labeling. So they automated, so once somebody entered data from one of their electronic forms and it sent it over, it was directly labeled over. So it didn't require anybody to go in and hit save, add label. It automatically, as soon as somebody created data on this side that had a date of birth, had a social security number, it automatically was labeled in as PHI, that kind of information, which is
Yeah.
pretty good considering what they had historically that wasn't labeled data.
Yeah.
So on the Copilot side, they did a customized approach to identify what that is, but the best description I can tell you is that they used the configuration manager and they used compliance center and they used purview. So when they say it's when I say it's customized, they just went in and they did the things they needed to do to minimize their scope creep that they had in 365. And by doing that, they saw that scheduling conflicts dropped down. They saw there was an increase in first-time submissions for insurance claims. And what I mean by that is that they saw the emails going out and the return request questions. The Copilot over time saw that, hey, if you add this contextual piece here, it has a higher likelihood of submitting this data. So before you draft this, include this piece, include this. So the staff were learning that, hey, when we are submitting this for a pre-auth or prior auth appointment, we need to include this additional material, even though it's not listed on the form. Historically, they've always asked for this additional piece. The Copilot would remind that staff member that it did it.
Wow.
And obviously, from that, it gave them a 50% increase in overall efficiency on revenue. I don't know about you, but seeing a 15% increase on revenue just by efficiencies overall, and you didn't really incur major costs there, which is the best thing about it. And it's always tough when it came to healthcare in general, getting people to be happy or employee satisfaction about stuff. But talking about Copilot was kind of cool. So
Yeah.
what's awesome about this, though, instead of just like polling them and saying, how happy are you? It was more of, how do you like working with this tool? And the biggest thing we heard back from everybody was like, I don't think you fundamentally understand. I get to leave at 5. And because I get to leave at 5, or I get to leave in my scheduled out time, I don't have to stay in chart. I don't have to stay and do the admin work that historically I've always had to do. And to me, as an employee, talking as an employee, that was critical for me. And for the clinic, they can then look down and go, hey, wait, our overtime rates are down.
Yeah.
Like, and you look at that, you look at the people, there's now work-life balance, there's all those pieces that you get just by efficiency. So as we start to navigate these things, you identify that efficiency also has other net positives. So work-life balance, employee satisfaction, all those other pieces kind of come in. It's actually kind of cool to see.
Yeah, it makes a big difference.
There's one more that
yeah, you've got one more here, the Legalese Law Firm.
Oh, yeah. This one's rough to talk about. So this one, so
what went wrong?
Yeah, so you can see there on the main points that they overlooked the need for human review of their generated content. So they went through, they created the data labeling policies, but they created very generic ones, and they were wide based. And so it provided an opportunity for attorney-client privileged information to be shared across the sector. So they had controls, they were too low, they were not applied specifically where they needed. And so client communications were allowed. If I'm talking to client A, I had policies that restricted me from, I should have had policies that restricted from saying, here's client B's information. I didn't. And because of that, because there wasn't a policy, because there wasn't a framework, there were some breaches of the attorney-client on multiple cases. They lost some major clients because of that. And it was also some possible mistrials. Those are still actively ongoing. Because of what happened, though, the state bar is now investigating them and doing some disciplinary action that's necessary. And I will tell you that state bar, loss of clients, attorney-client privilege exposed, like currently they're saying estimated direct costs is somewhere between 10 to 12 million. this is pretty
Wow.
much going to be a whole new name on this practice when it comes out of this, if it ever makes it out of it. And the net problem that happens after that is, can we be insured? Can we ever
Mhm.
get error and admission insurance ever again for my law firm or for my practice? And the question is not answered yet, but I'm guessing it's going to be no, or it's going to be so expensive they just won't do it.
Right.
And if you think about this in the broadest sense, on highly regulated professional services, AI implementation, you got to prioritize those ethical standards. You got to prioritize client confidentiality and the data that it lives. And you have to look at, how do we do this effectively in staged, planning, training, and then obviously using some safeguards. And I'll tell you that this one is probably the worst one out of the
Yeah.
bunch.
Yeah.
And I could say it was 10 to 12 million, because actually it's much higher, but we'll just say 10 to 12. So it's pretty
It's
bad.
yeah, it's not again, it's not something that you just go turn on
Yeah.
across your company and just allow people to use. There's a lot of considerations that have to be taken. Um,
Yeah.
so with that, we do want to get a read on if you are currently using or planning to use Copilot. We would love to know that to get a sense of where the room is at today. And then we're also going to ask a question after that about HIPAA and GDPR. So let us know if you're planning on using Copilot. And despite maybe some of the horror stories you just heard, there are some really awesome benefits too that that you don't want to miss out on as well.
Yeah, I can tell you, I was in a meeting, and we were sitting down to work out a plan for this initiative we were going to do, for a region that I was working with.
Mm-hmm.
And we walked in, everybody was at zero, and I pulled up Copilot and I said, create a plan for what we were doing, and it spit out an output that then became the agenda for the meeting. Because wasn't necessarily tuned to the market that we were talking about, or to the
Yeah.
group that we were talking about, but I just needed a framework. I needed something for us to walk through. Otherwise, as you've seen, if you don't put a slide in front of me with words, I sometimes walk around and wordsmith. And I'll tell you, it's pretty awesome. It's good to see. Oh, quite some numbers. That's awesome.
Good. Good to know. So, if you're already using it, we've got some next steps for you. And if you're planning to use it or considering it, then there are some additional things that you can have some conversations with some folks from Integris. So, a follow up question to that: if you are HIPAA or GDPR compliant, how confident are you in your organization's current Microsoft 365 practices for that? And you could probably extend this to if you have other compliance practices that you are supposed to, that you need to uphold. Do you know how your M365 is set up? Are you confident that it is following the framework that it needs to? We'd like to get that read on the room too, and see maybe if there's some additional conversations we can have after about compliance and M365.
I'll tell you, when we looked at this slide, the amount of letters we could throw on the
Yeah.
compliance piece. I mean, CMMC, DFARS, PCI,
Yes.
PCIS, DC, PCI, DSS, HIPAA, GDPR, like all those. And then you look at the banking, you look at financials, you look at, you, it's incredible that we have all of these different barriers of success, if you will, at times, and how you have to navigate those pieces and make sure that you're compliant, in those structures. It's kind of crazy to me. Wow,
Okay, this is good.
that's
Very
awesome.
helpful. Very helpful information. So we do have a VCSO practice as part of Integris too. And if that's something that you haven't explored yet with your VCIO or your account manager with Integris, you may want to follow up after this presentation and see about getting a conversation around that too.
Yeah.
So what is the next steps? What's the checklist here? This is a great slide. I love this one because I think it asks the big questions that you need to be thinking about when preparing for AI, whether it's 365 or something else. Um, it's important to take a step back. It's not just another shiny object that you want to chase after. And if you do want to be able to use it in a way where, in some of Brian's case studies of where it can make really meaningful gains for your business, then you have to start here before you go implement it. So, identifying what your goals are for using AI, what's the pain points that it can address, what is actually possible, where is your organization at today with their current capabilities in terms of AI, and like where do you need to go? Um, but I think this is the most important one because AI is really just about the data that you have. So, do you have a data strategy in place? And if you don't, what do you need to do in order to get your data into a strategic format? And then, does your organization have the necessary infrastructure and resources to support AI initiatives? It's not just a set it up and run and let it run. It takes additional support and planning and training, and you need to make sure that you have those pieces in place. Otherwise, either you're going to run the risk of 10 to $12 million, or you're not going to use it at all, and it's just going to sit there, and your employees are going to ignore it. So for this is our checklist. This is the Integris checklist for success. And we are working on an assessment of M365 tenant to go through with our clients. And you can talk with your VCIO about that. We then have an implementation of hardening steps within the M365 environment to get you up to the standards that you need in order for Copilot to work while protecting your data. And then there's another layer of data and threat protection. And this is on top of to make sure it maintains as you go forward so that there's the DLP policies and that SharePoint is configured correctly. Did you have anything to add to that, Brian?
So much, but I don't think we necessarily think we have time. I will tell you though that this, looking back at the last couple of slides and even now, it talks about starting with why. Why are we looking at data at AI, and then how are we protecting that data from AI or from other threats? And walking through a planned assessment is exactly what people need. And just overall, just making sure your 365 tenant is secure. If even if you're not considering like, hey, AI is too early, it's too new, you can still take through the steps now of saying, how secure am I now? Am I AI ready? And then walk you through these pieces. That's the thing that we always kind of walk away from, if you will.
Right. It's a good conversation to have, no matter where you're at right now in your consideration, because at the end of the day, it's a conversation about security and protecting your data. Copilot just makes it easier for employees to find things than they have in the past.
Yep.
And then, so some next steps, takeaways for you guys. As a reminder, the Vivox app has resources and links directly on that homepage. I'm going to flash that QR code again one more time here. This is a link that we're going to drop in the comments, and then also it's on Vivox. Microsoft has tons of resources on Copilot and what you can do for training, and how things you can learn about what it's capable of. It is a lot of information, and so it definitely requires some time and energy, but there is so much there that if you have employees who are excited about this and want to learn more, this is a great place to point them, and they can help your organization start to understand how you can use Copilot for 365.
I'll tell you, it's really awesome that Microsoft has provided that for us, just for everybody to start learning how to better use AI in their business, or the tools that are available with Microsoft's licensing already available, which is great.
Yep. Yeah, it's awesome. And then if you are ready to start the assessment process, and if you're using Copilot today and you haven't talked with your VCIO about an assessment, this is a new product that we are just starting to roll out. We're in the beta program right now. So we are doing these assessments for a discounted price. You can get in and get signed up. And it is popular, so there may be a little bit of a wait, but it is a good conversation to have with your VCIO, no matter what you're thinking about with Copilot. And then we will follow up with how you can implement it and help walk you through some of that process there. So you can find that link, additional resources on VBox. Here's the QR code one last time. And Brian, are there any questions? I can't see the screen.
No other questions. We covered Amanda's, which is awesome. And Ryan, thanks for the big call out. Ryan said, awesome content, guys.
Awesome.
Really
Great.
appreciate that.
Yeah, we're gonna keep hitting on this. This is not going away. AI is a thing. It's here to stay, and Copilot is very popular in Microsoft already. So we're gonna keep talking about this and figuring it out with you all. And so be on the lookout for additional content as we continue to figure out what exactly our clients need in regards to Copilot, the education, the understanding the risks to make sure that you guys are secure but also productive.
Yeah. I think this content and our cybersecurity content will be on YouTube as well for Buffalo Plaid. Well,
Yes. So every Friday at 9 a.m. Eastern, there is a live on YouTube and LinkedIn with some of our VCSOs. Brian just scratched the surface today of that compliance conversation. There's so much more that
so much more.
you can hear from our VCSOs on Buffalo Plaid. They're going to talk about cybersecurity. They talk about some other random things too. They have a good time. It's super informative, and it gives you a taste of that VCSO and what you may need from the compliance angle as well. So thank you all for joining us today. We are 1 minute over time, so we're going to wrap it up here. We really appreciate everyone being able to join us and listen in. And thank you, Brian, for sharing so much great information and just helping us understand how we can use Copilot and the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Oh, I'll tell you what. Hey, appreciate y'all. Thanks for coming in.